happened here at the very, I worked on this project for 2 years. At the very end, I started working at night, working with people on the street at night. And I began to create a new language for myself. I'm basically just working at night. And I got tired of working with people. I had all these issues about photographing people. And so I headed off into the desert, at the time reading the Carlos Castaneda books, and Burchett and Yates and people like that. And I just went in search of the miraculous. And so I began photographing with this springs called Salt Sea. The third desert canto is called the fourth is called the fires. These are also man-made fires. These were both the flood and the fires were shot between 1983 and 85, in a little chronological context. The fires were also man-made fires. They were created either by arson or control burns that got out of control. During a 2-year period, there was an engineer from the fire department that had set a couple hundred fires before he was arrested and sent to jail. This photograph, the great late curator John Sarkowski called this a messy Wizard of Oz. This is one of the great lies of photography. This is actually, these guys were out there shooting rabbits that come out of these controlled burns. The two men are actually on different planes, but the way the photograph flattens it out, it looks like obviously the guy is shooting. He's not. The next desert canto is called Father 20, The War. And this is actually about U.S. Navy practice on Indian lands in the Nevada desert. This is a bomb crater. In the center you can see this is an unexploded bomb. Thousands of unexploded bombs sort of got buried beneath the sand. Sometimes their tips would be up, coming out, and often they were underneath. This is actually called Lone Rock. This was actually the Northern Paiute ritual site, and over 40 years, the U.S. Navy bombed it from 260 feet to 160 feet in practice bomb. This is actually also in the Nevada desert. This is a personnel carrier painted yellow to simulate a school bus. I showed this slide years ago. This was 1986 that I did this work. And I showed the slide, and I was challenged and said that it was not used for bombing practice. Probably just was, I don't know, just out there for location or something. But a few years later, I went back over and flew over, and I did a photograph of it. The little pieces of yellow were all around the desert that had been bombed. That's an unexploded 500-pound bomb. The next canto is called The Pit. These are mass graves of dead animals buried in the Nevada desert. This work, it's been interesting when this particular photograph I printed very large and had up on my studio wall for a couple of years, and I found it one of those pictures that I just could not pull down. It just lived with me maybe longer than many of my other photographs, and I really wondered about that. One of the questions that comes up with my work is whether I'm aestheticizing the Holocaust or making beautiful pictures out of horrible things. And I do feel like I go to great lengths to make formally beautiful photographs so that they stay with you, that they linger, that they impact you. And this photograph was a real turning point for that. I felt like it turned out to be, maybe for me, one of the best photographs because it just demanded thinking about and revisiting over and over again. home, and I photographed it on site, but I also took it home and photographed it in my studio, and just photographed the cages that I found in. So this is another canto called The Event. One of the cantos I haven't shown is called The First Event, which was the space shuttle landing at Edwards Air Force Base. This is actually the Bonneville Salt Flats. It was shot in 1992, and it's where they hold the world land speed records for jet cars and motorcycles and things like that. And some of these jet cars go 4, 5, 6, even 700 miles per hour. This is actually the world's fastest mobile home at 96 miles per hour. For those of you that know your history, this is where the Donner Party, famously, they got bogged down in the salt flats, and then by the time they got to the Sierra Nevadas that come to California, or over the side of the Sierras, they got caught in a snowstorm and ended up resorting to cannibalism. And just the irony, at the time that I photographed this, I think there's now a placard to that effect at the site, but at the time I photographed, nobody there knew about it, and I just thought the irony having these, jet cars and cars on here going so fast when the Conestoga wagons would move through them. The next desert canto are a series of clouds. Originally, the clouds, I had an extended caption putting, it's actually called Clouds Non-Equivalence, which is a reference to the great photographs by Stieglitz, and also reference the history of photographing clouds like by Western people. But I just felt in this historical moment with pollution, with the ozone layer, with all the issues, that basically clouds no longer could be looked at as just their formal beauty, that we no longer think of them in a pure sense, which is very sad. This is actually a man-made cloud. There's an industrial stack right below the frame, so you don't get to see that. That's artificial cloud. And then I did a series of skies, and this was an interesting challenge on a bunch of levels. One, at this time, what I was interested in is if I could take a photograph without using the camera the way it was intended. The camera was invented to depict three-dimensional space, one-point perspective. And I wondered, could I make an interesting photograph if I removed the horizon line, which gives a reference, or stars, moons, any kind of clouds, any kind of reference. If I just photographed the sky with no very animal kits are more explicitly political photographs. Then I also did more conceptual photographs or even theoretically driven series. And then I wanted to, by making them up into the large desert candle umbrella, kind of complicate the message, maybe make it more dynamic and more interesting. And so this is a good example of one of the series where I was trying to do something maybe more conceptually driven that would change the way we think about the other pictures. Extension of just the pure skies was looking at the what I call heavenly bodies in brackets SIC, S-I-C, meaning that we call the night skies heavenly bodies. It's got certain connotations to it. The stars, the planets are all named, Greek, Arabic names. So there's sort of this whole culture that comes when you look at the night sky. It's not just a neutral thing. What I found really interesting, I did a series of these different night skies, really long exposures with the large 8x10 camera. And so, for example, what I love about this picture is these long, you can see the different color temperatures of the stars. With the 8x10 camera, I was able to really show these, oranges and cyans and yellows. It's quite extraordinary. So, stars have these different color temperatures. And then there's Venus, which is this brighter planet there. But these little magnet-like things, and there's the elegance of the stars going through the night, which is such a beautiful, almost like a graphic, drafted line. And then these little magnet-like forms are actually missile evasion flares. I was camping out, and the U.S. military was doing war games overhead, woke me up, and I photographed them. And they would shoot these missile evasion flares at each other. So I recorded the whole thing. It was, I don't remember how long this exposure, maybe 4 or 5 hour exposure. So I thought the contrast between these kind of ugly marks versus these really beautiful, elegant ones was a sort of powerful metaphor. Similarly here, this is the North Star Polaris, and the long exposure, you get this sort of circular target type thing, and then you see all these man-made satellites and things, the long exposure that is shooting through almost like it's a bullseye or like a target. So what I've shown up to now is pretty much what I call the Desert Cantos, which is an ongoing project. By definition, it only ends when I stop making pictures. The idea is to just continue to go. During the span of working on those, there are other projects that I also did. This was actually the Oakland fire in 1991. I photographed the fire in 1991. It's near where I live, so I live in Stanford. So I went out and photographed, but I put the work away for 20 years. It was a great tragedy. People died, and I just didn't feel right about sort of building my career on it. So I just put it away, thinking along the lines of Civil War photographs that it was a historical moment that needed to be recorded. I was there, something I should do. So I did it, and then I just put it away for 20 years, thinking something which I've realized a lot over time is that photographs change their meaning over time, which is a really amazing phenomenon about photography. That photographs, that when they're made, actually shift in meaning over time as time changes it. And so I decided early on to put them away, and then a few years ago, I showed this work for the first time and did a book and put it out there after 20 years. And then also in 97, I moved from my studio in Emeryville to a house in Berkeley Hills. And shortly after being there, we trimmed some hedges, found that I had this amazing view of the little bridge from my front porch. And actually my wife got the call and she was just terrified. She had a lawsuit, but she was actually really nice and she was just crazy and happy to see this. And then she tells a story about this was a moment where she and her husband of 7 years were splitting up. They were saying goodbye to each other. They're still friends, and he remained in Hawaii. She lived in Chicago, and with the show eventually went to Hawaii. And then we met Rob, I think his name was, in Hawaii. But anyway, so this was the last. They were saying goodbye to each other, and then they came in, and it's just I'm really far away. I'm probably a good block or two away with this photograph, but I sort of caught it. Well, it was amazing when I was talking about this photograph in Hawaii. When I'm doing a lecture like this, somebody said, what is the legal ramifications? And Rob let me know for the first time that he was a copyright lawyer. He said he was cool with it. This is a handstand. Detail. You can actually, in the creek, you can count the toes. Yeah, the prints are up to 10 feet wide, 6 feet tall and 10 feet wide are the largest of these. This looks like a golf ball on an Arctic plateau, but it's actually a bathing cap in the ocean. Like a golf ball. And then it's a personal favorite. There's actually a figure right here. And there's the detail. It's called People Fleeing. Sea monsters or creatures or people fleeing the towers of 9/11. All these have these kind of very hidden references that are in my own head. But at the time, thinking about that, the title on the beach, of course, comes from Neville Shute's book and film, which was about the Cold War and Australia and the nuclear exchange between the Northern Hemisphere powers. And Australia was the last continent that had not been contaminated. And people are waiting, going to the beach, picnicking in the world. So this was after 9/11, so I was thinking about things like that. Now this was shot in 2005. This is photographs of Katrina. When I photographed, I went to Katrina after a month or two, I can't remember exactly. When it first happened, I was following like everybody else, and I wasn't planning to photograph it. And it kept calling me, and I just finally decided to get in my van. My wife and I drove cross country in 3 days. I called my assistant and said, can you find a place for me to stay in a hotel? I called the New York Times, Sunday Magazine, and said, I desperately have to get there and photograph there. Can you get me a press pass so I can work there? And they laughed at me because they said, the story is already 2 months old. It's not in the news anymore. But they said, sure, you can have a pass, but nobody wants to go there anymore. And so I got there. I ended up staying in a hospital in New Orleans to photograph. And I made about 1,000 photographs with my big 8x10 camera. And I made about 2,000 photographs with a small digital pocket camera and 4-megapixel camera, just a little throwaway camera that I used to take notes about where I was, street signs, things like that. It turned out that those 2,000 photographs with a small camera were really powerful. They're very just unaffected, simple, powerful records of what I saw there. And like the Oakland fire pictures, I decided at the time to put them away for 20 years. For the same reason I just didn't want to benefit from the disaster, but I felt like it was really important to document. And it had been well documented and all that. Based on the 5-year anniversary, though, I saw that Spike Lee was putting out a second film, and I was thinking, and I woke up in the middle of the night with an idea for a book, which was called Destroy This Memory, which was just a small portion, a small edit of the 2,000 photographs. And those are the images where people spray painted on their homes, cars, and trees messages to the real world, almost like text messaging, but with spray paint. It was, very crude message. made me so powerful about the experience there was it was devastating, and many messages are just really tragic and sad. But you did see this humor coming through over and over again, and it spoke to the resiliency of the people that went through this. That was really uplifting, actually, in the face of all this. It was really important discovery. And then there was the anger. The insurance companies just screwed everybody. And then I end the book with a sequence of pictures that can only be explained as existential wonderings. Then the next series I'm going to show, I think in the last 6 or 7 years, I've stopped shooting film and now shoot purely digital. I've been accused of going over to the dark side. And part of that, and I'm also now printing all my work again. In the early days with the Telegraph Avenue pictures and the night pictures of the desert that I showed you, I printed those in a conventional black and white darkroom. For many, many years, what I did is I sent my pictures out to the labs and they printed them. I'm now, because of the change in technology, I can now print myself in my studio. I'm now making pictures 12 feet wide, 8 by 10 feet. I'm able to do these beautiful big prints with new technologies. It's just not possible before. And one of the things that came out of that is just like my early experimental work where I was split toning and strobing cactus, barbecuing them at 20 feet with a strobe, things like that. I started printing and experimenting, and I did a series of negatives as positives. And the idea basically came from an unusual juxtaposition, basically of Ansel Adams and John Cage. Very unlikely, no? So Ansel Adams famously said that his 8 by 10 negatives should be, and he was a pianist, he said that they were scores to be interpreted. So you take the original, the good old-fashioned negative, and how you print them is a form of interpretation. And he literally called them scores. And then about 40 some odd years ago, I saw a book that just blew me away. It was called John Cage's Notations. And what John Cage did there is he invited composers to present their scores for their compositions, musical compositions, as graphic scores, something to be reproduced as a visual experience in a book. And he collected those. Some of them were very conventional, others were very experimental and just crazy, wild drawings and things. And I love that idea that the score should be something visual. So that's sort of an homage These are just grabs taken off my computer a few weeks ago. This is this now is leading into the Cancer Alley exhibition that you're here to see in the galleries. And basically in West Texas, all of you probably heard about that explosion. And the reason I show this is that my collaborator on the project, Kate Orr, talks about cancer alleys around the world. In other words, the place I photographed in Louisiana is just one example of many places all around the world, including the U.S. And West Texas is a really good example of this terrible explosion because people, communities are living too close to these really dangerous facilities. So let's show those real quick. So in 1998, the High Museum in Atlanta commissioned me to come to the South. They were doing a series where every several years they would invite a photographer not known for working in the American South to come to the South and do whatever they wanted. There was no strings attached. Just come, work, do an interesting project. And so I took them up on the challenge. I flew to New York. I had all these preconceived ideas, made photographs of Civil War reenactments or Ku Klux Klan sites or whatever. But I realized that these are all the stereotypes that are already in my head. And so what I actually decided to do was fly to New York, rent a car, and then drive into the South and see what I would discover. Kind of make it the first trip being a reconnaissance trip without really knowing what I was going to do. I just wandered around. And I wandered around. I did all kinds of different shots of things, each lots of potential for other projects. And then I hit the Mississippi River corridor in Louisiana. Basically, it's a 160-mile stretch between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. It's the second largest petrochemical corridor in the United States. The only larger petrochemical area is in Texas, and it's probably the second most polluted site in the United States. Essentially, homes, schools, communities are up against these huge industrial plants. This was kind of an amazing house when I went there. I photographed this in 1998. And when I was there, I could see that the people took a lot of great care of the house. They painted it, they were putting flowers out. The property values obviously are not that great. And basically the Exxons and Dow Chemical and these corporations are the wealthiest corporations in the world, but the standard of living here is just horrible. The roads are bad, the schools are bad. I mean, they're way below par. It's just wrong. I did a series of photographs along that corridor. This cloud is called the Norco cumulus cloud. Norco is the name of the town below it. If you look really carefully in the print in the exhibition, you can actually see that this is actually the town of Norco, and there's a refinery with a flare up there, and this cloud is being manufactured all day long. It's just the sky is perfectly clear, but this cloud is just changing form all day long. You can see actually the creation of it right there. These are volatile hydrocarbons, and it's just sort of a permanent fixture there. And I think this kind of photograph is typical of what I try to do, which is to seduce you, and it looks really beautiful. It looks like a gorgeous day. It is a gorgeous day, and yet something is wrong in paradise. Alligator Bayou. This area was, for years, just prison next door dumping human waste for years, and then anyway, Alligator Bayou was an eco resort that people tried to preserve these swamplands, and basically a few years ago, the time it goes down, there's just too much pressure. This actually is a tour north of Baton Rouge. met people that used to fish there and live on the fish that are caught. You're really not supposed to fish there anymore because the fish are contaminated. But this guy was definitely fishing. This is called night release. A lot of times the companies dump stuff at night so that it's not as obvious. In 1998, when I photographed here, there was still a thriving African-American community around this basketball court, but they've had so many problems with the Shell refinery next door that they finally, after years and years of battles, finally got, in I think 2002, Shell to pay to move them out. So, but the problem that happens a lot of times is that these communities, African-American communities, which are often the ones right up against the refineries, their communities are split up, their property values are worth nothing. It's just a form of environmental racism, actually. This is the Dow Chemical Hazardous Waste Site. This cyclone fence, actually on the other side of the cyclone fence, is the Mississippi River. And whenever the water table comes up, and in the foreground is the waste site, these are actually dead fish that are being sort of decimated. They're disintegrating from the chemicals in the pond there. When the water table of the Mississippi River comes up, obviously the cyclone fence does keep it out, and the waters leach back into the Mississippi River and go down to New Orleans. Here in the print in the show, you'll see that it actually Dow Chemical put up a sign saying that it's dangerous for human beings. This is actually West Bank of the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River is like a national treasure. It's one of the great rivers in the country. Naturally, and of course culturally, historically, it's just so important. And it's just become, this is right next to Dow Chemical, it's just become a trash dump. This is the viewing tower from the state capitol in Baton Rouge. That's Exxon. And in 1998, when I photographed this, they still had this telescope. I went back in 2010, and they removed the telescope, so you wouldn't be able to see that. And I forgot to mention, so I did the original series in 1998. I did some shows of the work, published a few of the pictures. But in 2009, the High Museum in Atlanta came back to me and said they'd like to revisit the series. They felt like it'd be really important to go through all the pictures, the original shooting, and sort of re-edit and see what's there, because they felt it was really important. And so I said that'd be fine, but what I want to do is I also want to go back and shoot in 2010 and see if things have gotten worse, if they've gotten better, or stayed the same. I also said that when I first did this series in 1998, I had a journal, and as I was driving around, I started drawing ideas for an intervention into the landscape. What would this landscape look like if the oil companies weren't here, and we turned this beautiful Mississippi River into a gorgeous place again, where you had cultural tours, museums, basically turning into an eco-state, an eco-national park. So I had all these drawings. They were very naive, but I showed them to an architect friend, and she said, why don't you collaborate with a real architect and see what you guys can come up with. So I went back in 2010 and photographed sort of the state of affairs, the way I saw them, and then I also began collaborating with a landscape architect named Kate Orr. This actually was a photograph, I'll show you Kate's work in a second. This was a photograph I did in 2010. If you look really carefully, you'll see that there's a helicopter. It's actually returning from the BP oil spill. This is right, I just happened to be there at the time that the oil spill started, and future. You can look vertically at this sociological, cultural, historical, economic, environmental issues in each of the photographs. So the second part of the book is a really deep, well-researched exploration into everything you could possibly want to know or need to know about oil. She felt like we really need to educate ourselves. So whereas the first part of the book would maybe take a half hour to look at all the photographs, read all the captions, and really grasp what my work is about, I would say that for every spread of hers, you could spend a half hour to look at very carefully. This is just some of the graphics. She did this series called Through Lines, often based on a different photograph. This is about different toxicities in the environment that get into the human body. This is a historical graph showing the history of the different oil corporations, and the monopolies, and the timelines, and how they, the very first, this is, like the very first oil company, and then they broken up, and Stanford oil became monopoly, and broke up, and it brings all the way to present day. And in some cases, she would use my photographs, take a detail, either a large detail, or sometimes it's a small one, and sort of extrapolate on the detail. It's about the manufacturing process of oil. This takes that Norfolk cumulus cloud there, and the fisherman there, and talks about the whole cycle of toxicity, how it goes into the water, gets absorbed through plants and animals, into the air, and back through this endless cycle. In the back of the book, we have what Kate calls, it's based on her Girl Scout handbook. It's basically a handbook for alternatives for this kind of practices. So what she does is she's gathered small efforts and huge efforts of people doing things differently today and puts them in the back of the handbook, and it's something we're going to build. I think the book is almost out of print, the first edition almost out of print. And when we do the second edition, we'll expand on it and add to all these things, because it's something that's been very exciting to watch sort of the response and other people responding and saying, hey, this is what we're doing